meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 42 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the committee's motion adopted on Tuesday, April 27, 21, the committee is meeting to study the subject matter of Bill C-30, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on April 19th of this year and other measures. I will forego the other formalities because everybody who's on this line has been through this enough times that we don't need to do that. First of all, let me apologize to all the witnesses who came and on time. We were dealing with a subcommittee meeting, of which I'll now go into that motion to see where the full committee stands, and then we'll go to witnesses. And as I said to members at subcommittee, if I have part of this wrong, don't be afraid to correct me. So the motion that we passed at subcommittee that we will look for a vote on at full committee is this: that the committee continues its study of Bill C-30, the Budget Implementation Act, by inviting witnesses to appear in the contents of Bill C-30 during meetings scheduled the week of May 17th, and that members of the committee submit their prioritized lists for the study of Bill C-30 to the clerk of the committee by no later than Friday, May 14th at 6 p.m. That's a little bit of change from the motion that's before you. And that these lists be distributed to members as soon as possible by the clerk. Moving to clause-by-clause review of Bill C-30 no later than May 27th at 3:30, and May 27th is a Thursday. At Thursday, May 27th at 3:30. And that the clerk of the committee write immediately to each member. That clause is the same. Just hold on. Moving to clause-by-clause review of Bill C-30 no later than Thursday, May 27th at 3:30. Section A, amendments be submitted to the clerk of the committee in both official languages no later than May 25th at 12 noon. Clause B is the same on the motion that's before you. Clause 3 is the same on the motions for you. And we've agreed that the Finance Committee will do 3 meetings following the conclusion of the study on Bill C-30 on tax evasion, and following that, the steering committee would meet as soon as possible to plan future business. So that's the motion. Is someone willing to move it? Moved by Peter Julian. Any discussion? Mr. Clerk, what did I miss?
Wednesday next week.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. And that compared to our previous schedule, which was several meetings next week for 3 hours, that we not meet on Wednesday, May 19th. So we would meet on Monday for 6 hours. It's on your schedule, the 17th, 18th, 20th, and 21st. Okay, it's up for discussion. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, then we will go to witnesses, and we're dealing with Bill C-30, parts 1, 2, and 3. I'll go through the list of witnesses so that they're on the record, and we'll go from there. Trevor McGowan, Director General, Tax Legislation Division, Tax Policy Branch. Dave Boline, Senior Director, Legislation. Maud Lavoie, Director General, Business Income Tax Division. Pierre LeBlanc, Director General, Personal Income Tax Division. Pierre Marcel, Director General, Sales Tax Legislation. Phil King, Director General, Sales Tax Division. Francois Boulet, Expert Advisor, Sales Tax Division. Dominic De Frusico, I got that wrong, Dominic, I know. Senior Advisor, Sales Tax Division, Warren Light, Expert Advisor, Sales Tax Division. And I imagine we're starting with Trevor McGowan. And just to committee members, I know members sent me a list for a regular kind of lineup on questions. What we typically do on Budget Implementation Act, and if you got a concern about this, raise it. What we typically do is rather than go through the 6-minute, 5-minute rounds, what we do is just take in order who's ever got question on whatever division we're dealing with in like part 1A. If you got a question, I'll recognize you and we'll take one supplementary and then we'll go to the next questioner and then we'll come to B. So if there's no problems with that, we will start. Part 1, A, I believe it is, likely you, Trevor. Welcome. You're an old hand at this.
Thank you, Chair. Owing to the time and my understanding that a package of summary materials have been provided to the committee, I'll provide a brief overview instead of going through each of the measures in the bill, unless you'd like me to do so. Part 1 of Bill C-30 deals with the Income Tax Act and amendments related to it. It contains measures that were either announced or confirmed in the 2021 federal budget. The confirmed or previously announced measures include some from Budget 2019 and some others that have been announced but referenced in the budget itself. These would include, for example, an increase to the basic personal amount that essentially provides a tax-free amount for Canadians, gradually reduced for higher income earners, as well as extensions to various COVID-related subsidies, such as the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and the Rent Subsidy, and the introduction of a new hiring program, as well as the enhancement of the Canada Workers Benefit, a program that provides assistance to lower income workers. So with that, we would be happy to take any questions you might have on part 1, or provide a more thorough overview, as I said at the opening, if that's
okay. I'll start this way, and what I would do is, because I have to look at the part 1, the divisions on my screen here. I guess I can click it off. If people would just put up their hand using the raised hand function as we go along, I will go through part 1 and then A, B, and C, if that's okay with people. And there's enough people here to be able to answer those questions, I'm sure. So, get my books out here. So, part 1A is providing relieving measures in connected with COVID-19 in respect to the use of employee of an employer provided automobile for 2020 and 2021 taxation years. Has anybody got any questions on that? Seeing none. Then on B, limiting the benefit of employee stock option deduction for employees of certain employers. Gabriel?
Oui, donc bonjour.
Good afternoon, everyone. Could you please quickly explain what this is aimed at? Thank you.
I didn't have my translation on. Do you want to run that by me again?
Oui, donc.
Yes. Could we get a brief explanation of the objective of this clause and what it's aimed at, and what does it do? Thank you.
So Trevor, we'll turn to you and you can direct it to whoever and we'll go from there.
Thank you for the question. I see my my colleague Pierre Leblanc has taken himself off mute, so I'll turn it over to Pierre.
Pierre?
Thanks, Trevor, and thanks, Mr. Chair. Et merci pour les questions.
Thank you for your question. The purpose of this measure is to improve this deduction for certain employees and certain employers. The proposal is that we have an annual limit of $2,000, and this limit would apply. There's 3 stock options possible that could use these options, this measure, and this limit will be based on the fair market value of the stocks at the time of purchase, and to ensure that startup businesses, emerging businesses, to ensure that they're protected. So if we work for a private corporation in Canada, these employees will not be affected. And also, if you work for another employer and the gross income of this employer is $500 million or less, these employees will not be subject to this new measure. So generally speaking, that's what this measure is all about. Thank you.
Do you have a supplementary there, Gabriel? You okay? Tamara. You're muted, Tamara.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I have general questions, and I think it would apply to this section, but I mean, somebody will have to correct me if it's not. So in 2018, CPA Canada put out a report that stated the following: Canada needs to ensure we continue to create jobs, attract investment, and remain competitive. But on these vital measures, our current tax system is falling short, and Canadians and their businesses risk falling ever more behind their global peers. Now, especially after the pandemic, more than ever, we see a need to be an attractive place for investors and job creators. And I was wondering, do we see any serious attempts in this budget to tackle the problem of competitive taxation environment, which would attract business to Canada? I was wondering how this would also impact that.
Does anybody want to take that one on?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the question. I mean, maybe I can just speak in the context of this clause for the stock option deduction. And I was saying to Monsieur Sainte-Marie, the government's really trying to balance 2 objectives here. One is noting that historically the stock option deduction has been disproportionately claimed by individuals with very high incomes. And I mean, the government's overall concerned about tax fairness. But at the same time, recognizing that, I mean, a really important concern here is that stock options are used as an important recruitment tool for startups, for scale-ups, for emerging employers, and to maintain that ability, that competitiveness, as you say. So the idea here is that this new limit of $200,000 annually, based on the value of the options that grant, would only apply to certain employers. So it wouldn't apply if you're what we call a Canadian-controlled private corporation, a CCPC, and it wouldn't apply if the annual revenues of the company for whom you work are $500 million and less. And the idea is that if these are the companies that for whom the stock option deduction remains quite a vital tool. So I think the government, that's the proposal you see here is designed with the balancing of those objectives in mind.
Thank you, Pierre. Do you have a supplementary there, Tamara, or I'll go to Gabriel? Okay, Gabriel.
Oui, merci. Désolé encore.
Thank you very much. Has the department assessed how much tax could be collected with the implementation of this measure? Thank you. What would the additional revenue be?
Oui, merci.
Yes. Thank you for your question. We published our estimate in the economic statement in the fall. I think it was back in November of 2020. In the fiscal year of, we talk about our estimate. We talk about an increase of $55 million in revenues. I think it's an important point to realize is that it's only the implementation of this measure is for stock options that are given as of January 1st, 2021. And it takes a little bit of time for employees to be entitled to these options. And that's only for 2025-26. But in the longer term, according to our estimate, we think that this will have a very positive impact on federal revenues. That would be up to $200 million, more or less. Thank you very much.
You all. We'll turn to section C, and I might remind members there was a document come out earlier in the week that has this information and some explanations there if you want to refer to that as we go along. So part 1C, providing an adjustment for payments or repayments of government assistance in determining capital cost allowance for certain zero emission vehicles. Any questions on that one? Seeing none. Peter, did you have a question? Julian? You're having trouble with your computer, I know, today.
Yeah, désolé. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. I just have a question with respect to the impact when you look at zero emission vehicles. Is it been estimated how many employees or individuals may be using this measure in the bill, and what would the cost be?
Go ahead, Maud Lavoie.
Oui, donc,
Thank you. Maud Lavoie, I think you're talking about the amendment in this section. But you're talking about the whole measure, perhaps? At the department, we feel that this will reduce government's revenue by $62 million by in 2025-26. I don't have the specific number of companies that might take advantage of this provision. This is just an estimate that we've done, but it will be subject to some uncertainty. The mining sector in particular has demonstrated a great deal of interest in using this measure.
That satisfy your question there, Peter? Okay. Then nothing more on C. Then on D, part 1D, expanding the scope of the foreign affiliated dumping rules to further their objectives. Part 1D. Any questions, anyone? Ted Falk? Well, you're on mute, Ted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that. I am just wondering what kind of situations this would apply to.
Who wants to take it there, folks? Just
Thank you.
yell. Go ahead, Trevor.
Thank you for the question. The foreign affiliate dumping rules apply where they currently apply where a non-resident corporation, a multinational, owns a Canadian or a corporation resident in Canada, or that controls them. And the corporation resident in Canada wants to avoid Canadian tax, and so they engage in what was called a foreign affiliate dumping transaction. And those are generally used to extract earnings from Canada while reducing Canadian tax. One example might be instead of paying a $1 million dividend from the Canadian corporation up to the foreign parent, which could attract 5% withholding tax, representing a tax cost of $50,000, they might instead purchase shares of another company within the group, bringing them under Canada, and $4 million, which does not attract withholding tax. And in that sense, the money is dumped in the foreign affiliate or in respect to the foreign affiliate. So that's how the rules currently work. As I said before, the rules currently apply where a corporation, a non-resident corporation, controls a corporation resident in Canada, but the same sort of planning opportunities and risks arise where a non-resident individual or trust owns the Canadian corporation. So what this measure would do is it would extend the existing anti-avoidance rules that are intended to address these types of foreign affiliate dumping transactions. And I just gave one example. There are numerous iterations. It expands them to apply also where the parent on top is an individual or a trust instead of just a foreign corporation.
Supplementary, Ted?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is this quite a prevalent problem that you're addressing?
It can be prevalent in terms of the size of the investments, but not in respect of the number of affected taxpayers. There aren't tens of thousands of them in using this type of structure, but it is something that that has been seen.
I imagine this would be something that more sophisticated corporations would be trying to achieve, and more international-based corporations.
That's correct. It applies only in the multinational context.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you,
Gabriel.
Oui, merci.
Thank you. Once again, I'd like some clarification. Do you have the number of companies that are being targeted by this amendment? And how much revenue does the government expect to get as a result of this measure? And is this the measure where it's just Canada in the G7 that has not actually got a similar measure? Appreciate that if you could come back with a figure. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you on that one. Did anybody else want in from the Department of Finance? I don't have everybody on my screen. I'm split between two. So if you want, just yell if you want in. Okay.
Excusez-moi.
Pardon me, Wayne. I wanted confirmation that the 6 other G7 countries, did they have this type of measure in their legislation? But it's been confirmed that the answer to that is yes.
Let me see.
Dave Bone here. I would have said that this is a rather atypical measure. It has been implemented by other countries, but I do believe that France has a similar measure, but I don't think that there are any other countries that have implemented similar measures. There are other measures. Did that answer your question? Yes, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Jansen.
Okay, I think this might be in the same vein, but you'll have to forgive me if it's not. I was wondering, foreign-owned companies employ 2 million Canadians and are responsible for about half of Canada's exports. So attracting foreign investors is a high priority. Yet our tax system makes it difficult for multinationals to transfer funds among its subsidiaries, making our country less attractive for investment. In 2016, the Conference Board of Canada estimated that the withholding tax costs Canada up to $2.6 billion in foreign investments per year. Shouldn't we be tackling that issue head on when we're desperately trying to grow our economy?
Who wants to take that one if it's not too political? Trevor?
I don't know if my colleague Maud Lavoie could speak to the economic side of it. I can speak to the legal and technical impacts of this measure. What it does is it affects an existing rule in Section 212.3 of the Income Tax Act that is aimed to address these foreign affiliate dumping transactions. And as I said earlier, it extends the application of these rules to situations where a non-resident individual or trust is investing into Canada, but it does not, in and of itself, impose it doesn't introduce a new obligation for corporations resident in Canada that are controlled by foreign corporations. Rather, it just it extends the application of an existing set of rules. So it's not imposing it; it's extending it, and it ensures more of a level playing field, where we do have withholding tax, as was mentioned, on dividends coming out of Canada, and it ensures that where withholding tax is intended to apply, that it actually does apply.
Thank you, Trevor. We might have lost Maud. I see her name up there, but I don't see her. There she is.
I'm
Did you
here.
want to add anything, Maud?
No, I think Trevor's answer
Okay.
was complete. Thanks.
Okay. Anything else there, Tamara?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, do they feel that this makes Canada more attractive to investors?
Trevor or Maud? Does it make Canada more attractive to investment?
It's Dave Bone here. I don't think it's really about real investment. This is purely an integrity measure. This is about multinationals that are dumping foreign affiliates into Canada for really no economic benefit. It's just a tax play as far as this particular measure goes. And as Trevor says, we're just expanding the scope of it so that it goes beyond the more classic situation where there's foreign corporations that are controlling the Canadian subsidiaries to extend it to individuals and trusts that are controlling the corporation, the Canadian corporation.
Okay, I have Annie Koutrakis. Annie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does the government foresee any difficulty in the adoption of these amendments? Is it going to be difficult to adopt them?
I understand. If the question as to whether the amendments could be easily administered by the Canada Revenue Agency, as was noted, what they do is extend an existing set of rules that have been around for a number of years, and tax advisors and their clients are well accustomed to them, in addition to our Canada Revenue Agency. These are our rules, as I said, that have been around for a number of years. They have been revised a few times since their initial announcement in response to stakeholder feedback. And so they're fairly well understood by both the tax community and the Canada Revenue Agency.
So therefore, we don't foresee any difficulties.
No, it's largely an extension of an existing set of rules that is that has been administered and functioning for some years.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then no further questions on that section. Then turning to part 1E, providing change in use rules for multi-unit residential properties. Any questions on that one from members? Peter Julian.
I would just like you to run through those provisions, those changes, so that we can completely understand the impacts.
Who's on that one?
Thanks. I'd be happy to give an overview of the proposed or the amendments in the bill. They relate to the change in use of properties. Currently, if you, for example, own a rental property and you change its use to become your principal residence, then there's a deemed disposition of the rental property, so that the value that increased while it was a rental property is taxable, and the value that increased while it was a principal residence is eligible for the principal residence exemption. Currently, there is a deferral available where standalone property is changed from say, rental to your personal use, possibly qualifying for the principal residence exemption. But that election is not currently available in respective changes of use of multi-unit residential properties. So if you have a duplex, and for example, and you're renting out both units, and you decide to change one of those units from a rental unit to your principal residence, currently that election to defer the accrued gain is not available. And it's a sort of a technical hole in the rules, and there's no reason why it should be available for a standalone property and not for a semi-detached or a duplex. And so this would help align the rules for multi-unit properties with those that currently exist for single-unit properties, and provide for a more coherent set of tax rules.
Peter? Okay. Then we'll move on. I see no one else. Part 1F, establishing rules for advanced life deferred annuities. No one up on that one. G, providing for an option to deduct repaid emergency benefit amounts in the year of benefit receipt and clarifying the tax treatment of non-resident beneficiaries. Any members on that one? All right. Gabriel.
Oui, désolé, j'aimerais.
I'm sorry. Could you please explain the part pertaining to non-residents? Thank you.
Just yell. Trevor?
Thank you. I'd be happy to do so. This is, again, a highly technical change to the rules and clarification. A lot of these programs that are listed have restrictions relating to whether or not non-residents can take part in the program. However, they don't all use the same concept of non-residency as the income tax system does. And so what this rule does is it addresses these incongruities or differences where you have the tax rules treating somebody as a non-resident and the relevant rules that provide the benefit treating them as resident. That can happen, for example, where residency-based tiebreakers apply under one of Canada's tax treaties that says that for our tax purposes, somebody is treated as being a non-resident of Canada. And what it does is that it ensures that the amounts received under these benefit programs are taxable in Canada in the same way as they would be if they were received as income by the individual.
Merci.
Okay, Julie Zarowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Saint-Marie stole my question, but I'll just have a follow-up question on that, which is how is it that we're defining non-resident?
The definition of residency, I can speak to the tax definition. Yes. Each of the other programs might have a different definition of residency, perhaps based on citizenship rules or what have you. But tax residency under our domestic rules looks to kind of fundamentally the concept of where are you resident, which looks to where your ties are. You know, that could be, where your house is, where your family is, where your bank accounts are, and things like that. So it's a bit of a factual determination. There are also rules in the Income Tax Act that can deem you to be resident in Canada, where, for example, you sojourn in Canada for more than 183 days. And layered on top of that, there are rules in our tax treaties where you might be resident in Canada under Canada's law and resident in another country under their law. And our treaties often provide rules to provide tiebreakers to determine where somebody actually is resident. So it can be, in particular in the international context, a difficult determination, but for tax purposes, fundamentally it looks to where your domestic ties are located.
Thank you.
Okay, no further questions. Ted, no, Ted must have the same question as Gabriel, his hands down now. Then turning to H, removing the time limitation for a registered disability savings plan to remain registered after the cessation of a beneficiary's eligibility for the disability tax credit and modifying grant and bond repayment obligations. Peter Julian. You're muted, Peter.
Hopefully everybody can hear me.
Yep.
Good. Okay. Wanted to know on an average basis each year, how many people who have the registered disability savings plans actually become ineligible over the course of a year, and what the impacts of removing the time limitation are specifically in terms of both accrued benefits, but also the government contributions to the registered disability savings plan.
Who's up? Trevor?
Pierre, do you have that?
Sure.
Okay, Pierre?
Well, thank you for the question. I don't have statistics handy on how many individuals in a given year who were eligible for the disability tax credit no longer become eligible. What I'm looking for here is an estimate. I mean, this is, Trevor mentioned some of these measures come from budget 2019, and this is one of them. In budget 2019, we estimated that the impact of the measure, the additional cost would be about 110 million over 5 years. So starting in 2019-20 and going till 23-24. So that was our estimate at the time.
Okay, just a quick follow-up. So lead us through currently with the registered disability savings plan, you have to pay back if you cease to be eligible 10 years of grants and bond payments. What would the changes, how would that affect that same individual? And that includes the states, of course, as well.
Sure. So the main change of the measure would basically two things. It would allow people to keep their RDSP open. Right now, under the current rules, you essentially have a couple years if you become DTC ineligible to close the plan. So allow those people to keep open their plan, and it would also allow people to basically to retain entitlement to the bonds and grants that they've already received. So under the existing rules, the previous rules, you would have been required to pay those back, in fairly short order. Whereas basically what this does is puts you on a par with those who retain DTC eligible. So, and generally the rule there is because of the 10-year rule, once someone turns 50, that's when they can stop getting grants and bonds. So basically when someone turns 60, I mean, that's when they'd have to start receiving the amount. So it provides that extension as well.
That okay, Peter? No one else? I'll write then on part 1I, increasing the basic personal amount for certain taxpayers. No questions on that one, I doubt. And then J, providing a temporary special reading of certain rules relating to the child care expense deduction and the disability supports deduction for the 2020 and 2021 taxation years. No further questions. I mean, there was questions, I know, the other night during the briefing, so some may be already answered. Okay. K, providing flow through share issuers with temporary additional time to incur eligible expenses to be renounced to investors under the flow-through share agreements. Mr. St. Marie.
Oui, j'aurais besoin de.
Yes, I need an explanation with respect to the note that describes this part. It says that you can use a deduction with respect to exploratory measures, and it says in parentheses a 10% deduction, or 100% rather. What does this 100% deduction mean? Exploration costs in Canada can be deducted at a rate of 100% depending on for income tax and collection. That's what it's referring to. Thank you very much.
I have to mute myself. My papers rattle in the ears of the translators. Any other questions on J? Okay. K. Providing flow-through share issuers with temporary additional time to incur eligible expenses to be renounced to investors under the flow-through share agreements. We're all right in that one. Then L, applying the short taxation year rule to the accelerated investment incentive for resource expenditures. No further questions there either. And if anybody from finance has something they want to raise, just interrupt. M, introducing the Canada Recovery Hiring Program refundable tax credit to support the post-pandemic recovery. Pat Kelly, go ahead. You're muted, Pat.
On the pandemic recovery benefit, could I have officials comment on the eligibility criteria? This came up in our meeting last week, and the eligibility criteria is very, if I understand correctly, is very similar to the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy, which new enterprises don't qualify for. Minister, I think in her response, talked about, if I remember correctly, it was the minister who said that there were new enterprises that would qualify for this benefit. How does the qualification differentiate from these other programs, or which enterprises are eligible to receive it?
Maud?
So for the Canada Recovery Hiring Program, the type of businesses or employers that can apply are Canadian-controlled private corporations, nonprofit organizations, charities, partnerships. It resembles the list of organizations that are eligible, for instance, for the wage subsidy. But if you are a corporation, in order to qualify, you need to be a Canadian-controlled private corporation. And so in that sense, the eligibility is similar. If in terms of the new business, they would also not be able to qualify if they cannot demonstrate that there was a reduction in revenue compared to a pre-pandemic period. I understand there were other programs announced in the budget that new businesses may be eligible for. At least when I say new, I mean those that were created after the start of the pandemic.
So you still need the year-over-year reduction to qualify.
That's
just
correct.
Exactly like the rent subsidy and the wage subsidy. Okay,
that's correct.
I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Tamara, Ms. Jensen.
Yes. I was just wondering, I was talking to TIAC earlier today, and they were saying that they don't believe this is going to be of any help for them because lockdowns are still in effect. They're just wondering when we, how can this program help them in any way? Because they just don't see how, with lockdowns in effect and with no timeline on the horizon for anything to actually get started again, how could they even begin hiring?
So perhaps I would note that this program is scheduled to be in place until the end of November. I believe that's, with the speed of the vaccination campaign, this is everyone's hope that we will be starting the recovery in the coming months, and that the businesses will be able to benefit from the incentive as time goes by.
Thank you, Tamara. Okay.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
So most of those tourism industries, I mean, obviously, if you're a ski place or something like that, it's not going to affect, maybe this would help. But most of these industries are seasonal and they're losing out their summer. And this basically doesn't take into effect until they're closed down again. Is there something on the horizon that's going to actually help them?
Well, the program will start in June and then end by the end of November. And so to the extent that they're able to open during the summer, if the sanitary restrictions are lifted, they would be expected to be able to benefit from this program.
Okay, no further questions on M. Ed Fast.
Yeah, Ms. Lavoie, I don't think you answered Ms. Jansen's question, and it's a fair one to ask. The Tourist Industry Association and the tourism stakeholders, they want to see the economy open, but quite frankly, if we're making the assumption that this summer the economy is going to be open with everybody being vaccinated twice, that's just not in the cards. Even the Prime Minister has as much as admitted that. So how do we get support to these industries, to the tourism industry, and all of the different companies across the country who have seen very little, if any, targeted support from the government? I know there's a little bit of money that was put in, about $500 million to support the tourism industry, but again, it's not targeted for emergency relief. It's targeted for adaptation, a whole bunch of other things that don't address the immediate needs of these companies and businesses.
So, I mean, I cannot speak to any spending programs that may have been put in place. I'm really just familiar with what we have in terms of the hiring subsidy, the wage subsidy, the rent subsidy. These programs are available to all industries if they have demonstrated a decline in revenues that they could benefit from. But in terms of whether there's additional support, I cannot speak to that, unfortunately.
I think, yeah, that's a question for the Minister, Ed. Ms. Jansen, anything further there, Mr. Fast, before I go to Ms. Jansen again?
It is a matter for the Minister. You are right, Mr. Chair, but we're asking questions about the specifics of the program design. Does the program design actually incorporate flexibility that will help these companies within the tourist industry? My guess is they won't be helped by this program, like so many other programs where they've fallen through the cracks. And they're likely going to come to committee and tell you that.
Okay, I'll go to Ms. Jansen. I don't think that Ms. Lavoie can answer that one. Ms. Jansen and then Mr. Fragascatis. Ms. Jansen.
Yes, I know in my discussion with them, they were pretty sure that it wouldn't work for them because of the fact that they will not be opening because a one vaccination summer will not open their industry. So what they had said was, the winding down of the wage subsidy is also disturbing to them because of the fact that they have kept a few people on, but they need to be able to keep those people on for a longer time than what the program is now looking like it's going to be going for. Have you had any discussion of how you can help those industries who will not be able to open because we're not getting vaccinated fully fast enough? And have you looked at all at how can you help them with a wage subsidy that would continue for them?
So it's hard for me to discuss all possible conversations that have happened between the government and an industry in particular. What I could say is that the Wage subsidy, yes, it's true. Like there's a decline in the rate that's being contemplated until September, where the subsidy would end. I think the one thing to note is that if the situation doesn't unfold as is currently expected, and if the pandemic situation is still at play, the government has kept the flexibility to add periods to the wage subsidy program until the end of November. So adding 2 additional periods is a possibility, and that could be done by regulation as per the bill that we're looking at. And they also have the flexibility to play with the top rate if the situation warrants it.
Okay, thank you, Peter Fragascatis.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting to hear this this feedback on the budget and this specific provision of it. And I was also quite intrigued to hear in the previous meeting how our Conservative colleagues would have been very anxious to pull away emergency COVID-19 supports, as we saw. I thought that was a stunning moment in the previous meeting, but I won't dwell on that, Mr. Chair. And just to put my Conservative colleagues at ease, it's the information's available online. Media has covered it extensively. The number of businesses, the number of individuals, the number of families that have received and benefited from COVID-19 support. And if they want further support, the government will be there. So members are able to ask questions, but I raised that last point just to assure my colleagues.
Okay, I don't think there's a question there. Julie Zerowitz.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I think Ms. Lavoie actually answered my question. I was going to ask whether or not it could be extended past November, but if I heard you correctly, Ms. Lavoie, it can be by regulation, and also that cannot. Oh.
No, I was talking about the wage subsidy.
Oh, okay.
The hiring program is scheduled to end by the end of November. Unless I'm mistaken, perhaps Trevor can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this one can be extended.
No, you're absolutely correct. It cannot extend past the end of November without a legislative change based upon this bill.
And I think,
however, to be absolutely sure we're all on the same wavelength, the level of subsidy or the level of support can be changed by regulation by Executive Council, right?
That is correct for the periods up till the end of November. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Ms. Jansen, are you back on?
Wait, hold on, Mr. Chair. I do have a follow-up.
Okay, Ms. Zerowitz, yeah.
And I do, and Ms. Lavoie, I know that there's been a little bit of a focus by my opposition colleagues about the tourism industry, but if I understood you correctly, this is for all companies, nonprofits who meet certain criteria, and I think that criteria would be that they have fallen below a certain sort of revenue income. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. And so if you could just respond to that, that'd be great.
Yes, that's correct. So to qualify for the hiring program in the first period, they need to demonstrate that they have some revenue decline compared to the same period last year. And then starting with the second period, they need to demonstrate to have at least a 10% revenue decline. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, all industries are eligible.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Chair, I think just for the record, we should clarify. I think I need to send an article to Ms. Jansen, who indicated we're not vaccinating fast enough. The Star has said that we're surpassing the U.S. today in terms of vaccinating more people.
Okay, we are on part one of the
how many doses, Julie?
Finish it.
The Star.
Part one of the BIA, folks. Just for a point of clarity, though, with Ms. Lavoie, you can use revenue over revenue of 2021 over 2020 or 2019, correct?
No, you have to compare to the pre-pandemic period, and so you have to compare to 2000, and depending on which months we're talking about, but 2019, that's the first approach. Or you can also compare to the average of January and February 2020. So you can use either approach.
Okay, that clears my mind. Ms. Jansen.
Yeah, that was one
and
question I had too.
We're on, just in case you don't know, we're in the Budget Implementation Act.
Yeah, that was my same question was, whether you could do it to 2019. But now I have another question. You're saying that you can extend the wage subsidy, but would there only be a way of extending it to everybody, or could it be targeted to just those industries that are heavily affected, such as the tourism industry, which clearly is in a completely different boat and isn't able to utilize this one?
Ms. Lavoie.
I believe via regulations, it could only be extended to all employers are currently eligible. So I don't think a target to an industry could be done unless there was a legislative change. Again, Trevor, please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely correct. There are a certain number of things that can be changed by regulation. Of course, for the wage subsidy, it can be extended by 2 periods and the rates can be changed and the phase outs. But more kind of granular changes or more fundamental changes to the program would need to be done legislatively.
Ms. Jansen.
Sorry, my apologies. I wonder if you can see how that might make it very difficult for the tourism industry to be able to continue if there can't be a targeted way of helping them, because I imagine we can't continue supporting all businesses as things open, but tourism lags. Can you see that might cause a problem for the tourism industry, which is already one of the most highly affected?
Well, I believe how to support the tourism industry going forward is a question for the government at this point.
Okay, we are going to move on to section part 1N. Before I do that, is everyone comfortable going to 6 o'clock Ottawa time? We can get the extra time, but we can't go that far. I know we're imposing on finance officials in doing that. Is there any opposition to that? Okay, we'll take the extra half hour and make up what we lost in the beginning. Then turning to N, part 1N, amending the employee life and health trust rules to allow for the conversion of health and welfare trusts to employee life and health trusts. Any questions on that? Ed Fast.
Yes, if we could just have the officials explain the ramifications of the last sentence, which addresses a relaxation of the rules as it relates to employee life and health trusts. What are the ramifications of that relaxation?
Who's up? Trevor?
I can provide some information on that. Just for broad context, for many decades, there have been a set of health and welfare trust rules that were largely based upon Canada Revenue Agency administrative policy and not a legislated set of rules. And in 2010, the Employee Life and Health Trust rules were introduced to the Act that provided a specific regime set out in the legislation to provide these kinds of benefits to employees. What this measure would do is it would provide rules to allow the older health and welfare trusts to transition into newer health and welfare or newer employee life and health trusts. However, in some cases, there were more flexible or more generous sets of rules that were implemented by health and welfare trusts. And so some of those are being picked up and incorporated into the new employee life and health trust regime. These benefits include, that could be provided under the ELHT rule amendments, could allow for death benefits of up to $10,000, paid leaves like bereavement leave or leave for jury duty, and also additional counseling benefits for mental health purposes.
Yeah, Trevor, I do understand that, but this references an expansion of the types of benefits that such a trust may provide to employees and their family members. Can you explain what additional benefits might be provided that are covered? And is there an impact to the fiscal framework by changing that?
I would defer to my colleague Pierre on the impacts to the fiscal framework. But as I mentioned, the specific types of benefits that could now be provided were the death benefit of up to $10,000, paid leave, such as for bereavement and jury duty, and counseling benefits for mental health purposes.
Okay, that's helpful.
Anybody else want to come in on that from finance? Okay, that it, Ed?
Yep.
All right, no further questions on that one. Part 1.0, expanding access to the Canada Workers Benefit by revising the applicable eligibility thresholds for the 2021 and subsequent taxation years. Thoughts on that one or any additional points by finance? Okay, Ed, you're okay? Okay. P, part 1P, amending the income tax measures providing support for Canadian journalism. We're all right on that one. Q, clarifying the definition of shared custody parent for the purposes of the Canada Child Benefit. All fine. R, revising the eligibility criteria as well as the level of subsidization under the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, the Canadian Emergency Rent Subsidy, extending the CEWS and the CERS until September 25th, 2021, providing authority to enable the extension of these subsidies until November 30th, 2021, and ensuring the level of CEWS benefits for furloughed employees continues to align with the benefits provided through the Employment Insurance Act until August 28th, 2021. We'd considerable discussion on this one actually earlier. Any questions? Gabriel, do I see you coming on there? Okay. All right. I think we've covered that one pretty well. Peter, Julian?
I just would like a full description of R. And of course, as we've raised before, problems with the misuse of the emergency wage subsidy. The criteria currently changes for those companies that use it for executive bonuses, I believe, after June 5th. So the question is, what the finance ministry has looked at in terms of making retroactive some of these misuses of the wage subsidy, including dividend payments and executive bonuses.
I'm muted myself. Trevor?
Thank you for the question. As you noted, the change that can require repayment of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy in respect of active employees applies prospectively, starting in June, for those periods of the subsidy, and it operates by looking at the increase in top executive compensation between 2019 and 2021 for certain public companies.
Just to interrupt Trevor for a sec, Matthew with the Conservative Whip's office, your mic's on. You might not want us to hear you. Trevor, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So it compares the remuneration paid to top executives, generally the top 5 executives in a publicly listed company between 2019 and 2021. And to the extent of any increase in that additional remuneration, it can require a repayment of wage subsidy for active employees paid during those periods. But as you noted, those are prospective in nature, and there's no repayment of past wage subsidy claims when companies would not have known about these new restrictions. Of course, the government looked at a number of options and received feedback from a number of stakeholders. But what is in the bill is the government's response, in particular in respect of excess or pay to top executives by wage subsidy recipients.
Peter, and then we'll go to Ted.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, you said that the government consulted with stakeholders. Did the options that were laid out to stakeholders include the possibility of making these provisions retroactive, given that the government from the very beginning, including the former finance minister, was very clear that this wage subsidy should not apply to dividends and to executive bonuses, and other countries, of course, put all of those provisions into place. So the abuses that we're seeing are strictly in Canada. So it would appear to me, given that the government said repeatedly it can't be used for these purposes, to what extent was the government consulting on making the actual components, the tools, to claw back that money retroactive?
I don't know, and I apologize if I misspoke that I said there was a consultation in the sense of a formal consultation, but certainly it is something that was reported in the media and that we heard about, that the wage subsidy had been going to companies that had paid dividends or had increased top executive compensation or what have you.
Mr. Falk, Ted.
Thank you, Wayne. Yeah, with the Canada Employment Wage Subsidy, is there any qualifications in there regarding foreign ownership of a company receiving these benefits? It is a Canada Employment Wage Subsidy, and if there's no restrictions on ownership, that it has to be a Canadian-owned company or Canadian-controlled company. Can you give us any data on how much of this money that has been invested in the CEWS has gone to foreign-owned companies?
Well, perhaps I can start. In terms of there are no restriction on foreign ownership, but in order to access the wage subsidy, the employees need to be located in Canada. So it would really just be for their Canadian employees and to support, the people that work here. In terms of data, so that would be a question for the Canada Revenue Agency, who has has all this data. To my knowledge, this is not on their website, but we can follow up.
Ted?
Okay, so you don't have information on how much of the CEWS money went to companies that were foreign owned or foreign controlled?
As I said, that would be more a question for the Canada Revenue Agency, but we can follow up.
Thank you. No further questions on that one, but just to clarify, Maud, the wage subsidy has to go to people employed within Canada. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Then turning to Part 1S, preventing the use by mutual fund trusts of a method of allocating capital gains or income to their redeeming unit holders, where the use of that method inappropriately defers tax or converts ordinary income into capital gains. Anyone want to add anything to that from finance, or any questions? Okay, we're all right. Then Ed Fast.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, is this an issue of evasion or simply avoidance? A matter of tax planning or something beyond that?
It's a question of tax avoidance. This isn't a case of tax evasion. It is the misuse of a system that had developed in order to help prevent double taxation, in order to achieve unintended tax benefits. But these are legal tax avoidance techniques and not criminal tax evasion.
And we're plugging that loophole with this.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Turning to part 1T, extending the income tax deferral available for certain patronage dividends paid in shares by an agriculture cooperative corporation to payments made before 2026. On that one, I forget the explanation the other night. Can somebody give me a little bit of an explanation on that one? What's the intent here?
Agricultural cooperatives can pay patronage dividends to their members, and this would extend an income tax deferral on the amount of any patronage dividends received until the time that the shares are exercised. The specific issue is that when these agricultural cooperatives pay patronage dividends to their members, that can carry with it certain tax consequences or immediate tax consequences absent this deferral in the Act. And so these cooperatives were having to pay amounts out to investors or to their members so that they could satisfy the tax liability that came along with the patronage dividends, which was causing cash flow issues for these cooperatives. So what this measure would do is extend, in respect of eligible shares issued before 2026, an existing temporary deferral that allows those immediate tax consequences, taxation basically, to be deferred until the disposition of the shares. So it helps cooperatives with their cash flow.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I've heard of that as a concern. I hear from lots of ag co-ops. Part 1U, limiting transfers of pensionable service into individual pension plans. Do I see any questions? All right, thank you. V, establishing rules for variable payment life annuities. We're all right in that one. W, preventing listed terrorist entities under the criminal code from qualifying as registered charities and providing for the suspension or revocation of a charity's registration where it makes false statements for the purpose of maintaining registration. I actually think that one came out of the money laundering study we did a number of years ago. Tamara, I see your hand.
I thought the clerks had a great question in there when they said how many of these sorts of groups are actually registered as charities.
Who's on that? Pierre?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. I mean, we don't have a global count of such activities. The rules are meant to prevent this to the fullest extent possible. I think what I can say is you've seen in the past where the Canada Revenue Agency has revoked charitable organizations for these sorts of reasons. And I mean, that's something that's always posted on their website as well as in the Gazette. And this is basically improving the rules just to make sure they are comprehensive and that they and also to streamline the revocation process for the CRA.
I'm not sure I quite understand. So we don't actually have any idea of how many of these groups are registered as charities in Canada?
Well, the thing is where illegal activity is found there. I mean, if they're listed as a terrorist entity, then they're revoked. So they're no longer a. We could talk to the CRA and try to provide the committee with some historical statistics on such revocations if that would be helpful. So
yeah.
Okay, we can do that. Annie Katrakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What is the current process for revoking the registered charity status of a listed terrorist entity under the criminal code? And how would the proposed changes modify the process?
Thank you for the question. I mean, basically, there are several steps kind of within the CRA that need to be taken. And what this would do would basically, as soon as an organization becomes a listed terrorist entity, the CRA would be able to immediately revoke, given the importance of addressing these issues as expeditiously as possible. There would be other means of recourse, but in terms of moving to the revocation stage, that would the CRA would be able to do that more quickly.
Annie, that it?
Yeah.
Okay, then we will move on to part 1, sub X, ensuring the appropriate interaction of transfer pricing rules and other rules in the Income Tax Act. I believe Gabriel's up first, and then Ed, Mr. St. Marie.
Oui, bonjour. Si vous...
If you don't hear me very well, I had to restart my Surface and it's still getting heated up. X and Y, can you please provide us with some figures? That is the estimates of additional revenue that the government thinks it will receive, and how many companies or businesses are being targeted if we refer to the previous years.
Take that question. It relates to X and Y.
Under the transfer pricing measure, I can speak to that first, and then if there's a question on the fiscal impact of the cross-border securities lending arrangement rules, hopefully one of my colleagues can mention that. It's from Budget 2019 and would be in the table for that. So the transfer pricing measure here is really more of a clarifying measure. It's not intended to tighten the rules, or generally speaking, it's not intended to tighten the rules or make sure that taxpayers can't avoid the transfer pricing rules. Rather, it affects the interaction of the transfer pricing rules with other provisions of the Income Tax Act. That can be contrasted with a consultation that was announced as part of Budget 2021, which the question may relate to. In that, the government announced an intention to consult on the transfer pricing rules more broadly so that they apply appropriately, and in particular in respect to an adverse decision that went up to the Supreme Court in the transfer pricing context. So the idea there would be to improve the operation of the transfer pricing rules more generally, so that they apply to prevent tax avoidance, and they apply appropriately in that respect. But this measure here is much more targeted and is more of a clarifying measure. There are two components. The first, as I said, deals with the interaction between the transfer pricing rules and the other rules in the Act. Transfer pricing is essentially the prices that are charged between entities across borders in a multinational group. And the rules attempt to ensure that those prices reflect prices that would have been charged at arm's length. And when the transfer pricing rules apply, they can apply to recharacterize or change the amounts paid. So for example, a payment of interest under the transfer pricing rules could be changed from $100, say that's non-arm's length, down to a $60 interest payment for arm's length. Interaction questions were arising with other rules in the Income Tax Act that would have similar effects. For example, the thin capitalization rules could say that if you pay $100 of interest, only $40 of that is going to be deductible. And so a question had arisen as to which comes first. And these rules provide clarity to both the taxpayers and the tax administrators that the provisions in the transfer pricing rules are to be applied first to set the appropriate prices, and then the rest of the rules in the Act apply as they should. The other component of it just relates to the normal reassessment period definition and the fact that it talks about transfer pricing, but it uses the wrong definition of transaction, and all the transfer pricing rules are based on transactions, and they have a special definition for that. So it ensures that when they're talking about transfer pricing or about taxation or transactions and transfer pricing, they're using the correct definition. And so it's more clarifying in that respect. But the actual consultation regarding to the effectiveness of Canada's transfer pricing rules was announced in Budget 2021 and still to come, I think, in the coming months. Then I think you'd asked as well about the cross-border security lending arrangement rules. Now, those are integrity measures for the most part that are intended to ensure the appropriate application of the cross-border securities lending arrangement rules and ensure that companies cannot enter into what are called colloquially broken securities lending arrangement transactions in order to avoid the application of dividend withholding tax through kind of cross-border derivative financial instruments. I say they're generally integrity measures, but there is an aspect of it that ensures that dividend withholding tax will not apply where the underlying shares are shares of a non-resident company that would not normally attract Canadian dividend withholding tax. So there is a relieving aspect to it, but in general, it makes sure that the securities lending arrangement rules under the Act work appropriately.
Okay, okay, Gabriel.
Oui, juste question de
Just a question of clarification. Thank you for your answers. I do understand that there are no figures attached to the transfer pricing rules in terms of the number of businesses involved. There's no figures other than those presented in Budget 2021. There are no more specific or figures with respect to transfer pricing rules and cross-border securities lending arrangements. Thank you very much.
Okay, then I got Mr. Fast next and Mr. Julian, and we will take questions on both X and Y. Mr. Fast.
Well, Mr. Chair, that was one of the best explanations of transfer pricing that I've heard. So thank you, Trevor. It was very well done. I did have one question on that, and that's a broader question. It goes beyond transfer pricing. The anti-circumvention measures that the budget contains collectively, what revenues are they expected to raise? Has a calculation been done on that? Transfer pricing is just one small element of that, presumably.
For each of the measures announced in the budget, this transfer pricing measure was in the 2019 federal budget. A number of other integrity measures were announced in the 2021 federal budget. Each of those in the budget supplementary annex. Each of the budget supplementary annexes that accompany the budget provide a table of the expected revenue increases or decreases associated with each measure. And so that's probably the best place.
Can you give me a ballpark figure? You must have an idea what this looks like. We're talking about in the billions, we're talking about in the hundreds of millions.
For this transfer pricing measure, no revenue was booked because it was a clarifying amendment. But in terms of the integrity measure, the international integrity measures announced as part of Budget 2021, I don't have that information at my fingertips as they're not included in this bill, but those amounts would be reflected in the budget supplementary information tables.
Okay, I will look at those tables. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. That completes your round. Peter Julian.
Well, that was exactly my question in terms of the increased revenue for tightening the definition and other integrity measures. We've got a lot of officials here, so I'll just ask you to supply the figure that is in the budget, if we could, please.
In the schedule and the budget, if somebody could find that and come back to it, give us it when you find it. I get the budget here, but I'll not look. So if somebody can think about that in the meantime, if they get a budget document handy, come back with it. Then we'll turn to part 1Z, which is allowing, we covered Y in that round. Z would be allowing for the electronic delivery of requirements for information to banks and credit unions. Any questions or any extra points people want to raise in that? Alrighty. Then part 1AA, improving existing rules meant to prevent taxpayers from using derivative transactions to convert ordinary income into capital gains. Gabriel.
Oui, merci encore.
Thank you. Do you have any figures associated with this? How many individuals are going to be targeted, and what additional revenue is expected to be generated?
This is
Trevor's got the paper out there.
The character conversion transaction measure, when it was announced in budget 2019, there were no specific numbers booked. It was largely preventative measure based upon a new market development. So the character conversion transaction rules were introduced I think back in budget 2013 in order to prevent the conversion of ordinary income into capital gains. And in 2019 and the lead up to 2019, a new second generation or third generation of these this planning was first developed, and this measure was introduced at the earliest opportunity in order to prevent the proliferation of that type of new planning. And so I don't see any revenue booking associated with the character conversion transaction measures from budget 2019, but it would have prevented the proliferation of this type of tax planning strategy.
Okay, we may have to go to Ed Fast on that one, Trevor, because he was sitting around the cabinet table then, and maybe he is the answer. Pat Kelly, you're up. Hey, you're muted, Pat.
I wonder if Mr. McGowan could give us a if it's possible, a simple example of the type of scheme, garden variety that this measure and maybe its previous iterations that currently exist are designed to prevent.
I would be happy to do so, and we'll try to make it as clear as possible. As I said, it attempts to transform ordinary income into half tax capital gains. So let's say that I want to invest in a bond portfolio, and I'm going to earn so much interest income, but that interest income is fully taxable to me as ordinary income. So even if I own it through a mutual fund trust, it's coming to me, and I'm paying a full amount of tax on it. And so what the strategy would do is that a mutual fund trust would be set up. It would acquire a bundle of Canadian securities. These are shares of publicly listed Canadian companies usually. And it would agree to sell those shares in 5 years' time to a counterparty. And the price for those shares was going to be determined by the return on the bond portfolio. And so in that way, the fund was able to get an economic exposure to the return on the bond portfolio, which if they held directly would be fully taxable as ordinary income. But when they sold those Canadian securities, they'd claim them as capital gains and pay tax at half the normal rate. So that's generally how these this planning works.
Okay. Thank you for adding that to the record. Thank you.
I suppose I should add that was a description of the first generation planning. This third generation planning exploited an exclusion in the character conversion rules that was intended to apply in the cases of a mergers and acquisition style transaction where the thing you get is where you're buying shares at some point in the future because you're buying a company. And so this new planning attempted to use that exclusion in order to obtain the same results.
Okay, thank you all on that. Then turning to part 1, double B, extending to a wider array of eligible automotive equipment and vehicles the 100% capital cost allowance write-off for business investments in certain zero-emission vehicles. Any questions there? Hearing none. Then turning to Julie Zerowitz, Ms. Zerowitz.
Just a quick question. Is this just to accommodate sort of the updated CUSMA, the updated sort of agreement with the United States? Or is this as a result of something else?
So this is a measure that would extend an accelerated capital cost allowance that was announced in budget 2019. So for those businesses that purchase, the one that was announced in budget, I think, was for those businesses that purchase electric cars or plug-in hybrids vehicles or vehicles using hydrogen, so those types of vehicles. And this measure, what it would do is extend that to off-road type of equipment. So if, for instance, you're in the mining sector, you're using electric excavator that could benefit from this incentive, or Zambonis, golf carts, all types of equipment that is used fully electric by businesses to extend the environmental benefits of that measure. So it's not related. The quick answer to.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much.
But a good explanation, just the same, Maud.
Yeah.
Part 1, double C, ensuring that the accelerated investment incentive for depreciable property applies properly in particular circumstances, and I'll go to double D, providing rules for contributions to a specified multi-employer plan for older members. Any questions on those two? All right, with that, we are at our extended deadline. So we have completed part 1. Look, thank you everyone for your cooperation and getting through this section. A lot of good questions and a lot of well-documented answers. With that, we will have to adjourn. Just Michael McLeod, before we adjourn, how are things up north? Are you still flooding? I think Michael's at something else. All right. With that, we will thank you all. Thank you very much to our witnesses for coming and for your answers today. We shall adjourn until Monday, I gather. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.